Now let's look into more details, this whole process of actually having authentication and have users and so forth, because that's a very key component of this whole web app. So we've seen this before. We're going to divide everything in two parts. So we have the Firebase Auth, and then we have the Firestore, where we can add books and retrieve them, edit and delete and so forth. Okay. Now, we are going to ignore, of course, the bottom part, the Firestore part. We're going to focus on the Firebase Auth again, but with more emphasis on how then would we create a user of our own coupled with the user class from Firebase Auth. This is a very important concept, okay? Because we need to keep track of all of our users that have been logged in, that have been created, as we saw in the Auth, Firebase Auth. But we then have to create something else that will hold all those users in our database. So what we need to do is to create a user, an app user. So when an account is created, the process has to go as follows. The create account method is called. At the same time, the moment that create account method is called, we are going to invoke another method called create user. So once that user is created, everything is good, then we're going to log in that user, right? Because we're going to authenticate that user and log that user in. That user's logged in, which means he's authenticated. That's when we show the main screen. All right? That is the flow. Now, let's look closely at this create account and create user part of thing, because we need to think about it. Okay, on one hand, we have the Firebase user class, which controls essentially all of the people, all of the accounts that are allowed to log into the application, right? But we also need to create a user, in this case, that will have a few other properties. So in this case here, again, like I said, we're going to log in that user, but on the back end, we're going to use that create user method, which will be connecting to a users collection, right? We're going to create a user and put in our user collection, which we'll create. At the same time as we create this user, we need to include the auth user ID of this Firebase user. Okay, there's two things. There is the user Firebase auth, which we've been looking at, right? The ones that we know. So when we create an account, there is that user from Firebase Auth. So what we're going to do is take that user ID, because every user created, this Firebase Auth user created, has what I call a UID, which is a unique ID. So a bunch of gibberish numbers put together to constitute that user ID, UID. Okay, so we're going to have to take that UID from our Firebase Auth user, the super user, if you will, and then add to this created user so that we have a way of knowing who this user is. We're going to have to create another list or another collection of users, which will have a little bit more information about the users that have been logged in. So essentially, what we're going to end up having really in our create user, as we saw user collection, which will add a auth UID, we're going to have something like this for a user that each user that we create will have an avatar URL, we'll have the display name, we'll have a profession, a quote, right? If they wish to have a code, and there it is, that UID. This UID is actually the ID of a Firebase user, which is connected to this user that we're going to be creating, right? So this is what we're going to be creating. This is the infrastructure that we're going to be creating next. Semicolon, I believe. All right, so now we can use this. How do we use this? So go back to our main screen there. Instead of going through all this process like this, I could change things. I can say, for instance, books, let's say final books or book list stream as such. I'm going to say use snapshots, okay, and I'm going to get data, get docs, and then I'm going to say map, right? And in this case here, I want to make sure that this is indeed a block. Okay, convert that to block. So what are we doing here? What we need to do then, this map here, this E, it's going to be query document snapshots, right? Which is exactly what we need. So I'm going to change this to of book, like that. Doesn't matter really. In this case here, I'm going to map every book that I'm getting from here, from our backend Cloudflare store, into an actual book object. To do so, we say book. Let's go ahead and import our book, package that like that, and I'm going to say book dot from map, right? This is a map that is coming in. We pass that book like this, and we're going to go ahead and get dot data. Now, if you hover over, you can see that this book list stream, right, is going to be actually an iterable type that will contain all the books. If we have one or two or hundreds, doesn't matter. Okay. One other thing before we move forward I have to do here is to make this to a list. So I say dot to list like that. So now we have an actual list. If you hover over, it says list of book. All right, very good. So in this case here, now instead of using data as such, I can actually use, I could say, if I wanted to, I can call that and give 0 in this case. And then instead of saying author like that, I can say dot. Look at that, because this is saying, okay, a list of books, type books. I'm going to get the first element that I find. I can go and fetch any of these fields. Let's go ahead and get notes for now to see what happens. I'm going to save this. Okay, let's log in real quick. Looks like our session is kicking us out. It's okay. And there we go. There's hello, hello, something like that. It's working fine because we actually got, in this case, just the notes. I could go, let's see, what else can we get? Of course, we can go and get the name. And the other thing I could have done also, I could have just created a book object, say book. It says equal to book list, or stream that is, should be list at this point. Like that, and put 0 just to get that one book. And then I have that book object like this, and just copy and use that. Okay, like that. That also would work. Very good. So there we go. Now we are making our lives a little bit better. In fact, I can just change this to author if I wanted to get that. Like that, and save. And you can see there it is, James. All right, so it works. And we'll continue refining all of this once we actually start putting together the whole application. But thus far, you can see that this is way easier. We can map things around so that we don't have to go through the process we had before, such as this.